Okay, so I think that we can begin. So welcome to everybody, and welcome, of course, to the panelists, and welcome also, of course, to the speaker for this spring meeting of OENOVITI International. So this meeting is concerning the development of objective measure of wine sensory complexity. You know that this format is short, 1 hour maximum, and the guest speaker of today is in fact Ronan Simoneau. Ronan should talk about hierarchical rate, all that apply, a sensory methodology to take advantage of wine aromatic wheels. Ronan is in the École supérieure d'agriculture d'Angers. And so, of course, after his talk, you will have some question and discussion with the panelists. The panelists, there are 3. Maybe I will begin with Pascal, because she is a lady. Pascal Denelin, she is professor in Changin, viticulture and enology, in the University of Applied Science and Arts, Western Switzerland. Thank you, Pascal, to be there and to have accepted to participate as panelist in the second panelist is our friend Antonio Graca. He's a general director in the Sograp Vineyards in Portugal. He's also member of the executive committee of OENOVITI International. And so we are happy to have him. He's a great specialist in several types of wine, and he's also very involved in climate change and effect, solution, well, a lot of skills. And then Wes Pearson, that is in AWRE in Australia. And thank you, Wes, really to be with us, because we know that it's very late for you. So thank you to participate, but we are very happy to have you because you are also a specialist concerning, of course, sensory aspect and the methodology. And so we are glad that you can also give your viewpoint, in fact, on the topic. So I will let now the word also to the colleagues that are the panelists, to Antonio, Pascal, and Wes. And I think after that we can begin. Thank you to all again. Thank you also to Agathe for the organization, and thank you also Ronan for the preparation, of course, of the work. So Antonio, maybe.
Yes, thank you, Pierre-Louis. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and especially to be here to discuss such an interesting subject that I believe is passionate for everybody who is into wine. And we are all looking forward to what Rona has got to share with us, and what we will be discussing afterwards. Hopefully will be a good contribution for everybody watching this. Well, yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonio. Maybe Pascal? We cannot hear you.
Hello, everybody. Sorry, I was writing a message, so it's what I have to do. Sorry very much.
Did you take an aperitif, Pascal? Or?
Not yet, but a lot of things today because we have some difficulty with train, and so I have to manage different things together. Sorry, but I will hear now. Just what do you want I do? I present.
Just say hello, maybe.
Just hello. Okay, so I'm very sorry. I'm so confusing. Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to be here. So sorry for the first the small difficulty to start. I'm working in sensory analysis since no, it's 12 years ago at Changin, and mainly to describe wine, but also sensory consumers. And today my main topic is mostly about Chasselas wine and consumer perception of Chasselas wine, but also natural wine and different projects about it, and mostly on the sensory perception fault or no fault in natural wine, and so on. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Pascal. You can see that there is very happy days in Switzerland.
Yeah.
You can recommend, especially for Chasselas.
Yeah.
The wine is very good. And so we can give the word now to Wes Pearson. So Wes.
Thank you, Pierre-Louis. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. I am a research scientist at the Australian Wine Research Institute. My area of expertise is, as Pierre-Louis mentioned, is sensory science. We have more than a couple different panels that we run at the AWRI, and we use, you know, from consumer panels to trained panels to you know, troubleshooting and problem solving panels. So we have lots of different sensory happening and use lots of different methods. So I'm very interested to see what Ronan has got for us to help with the development of this the RAFA methodology and keep moving the methodologies forward. Very interested to see what you have to say, Ronan.
Thank you, Wes. So I think that
you're muted, Pierre-Louis.
Thank you, Wes. Sorry. So I think that now we can probably begin the work and to see the presentation of Ronan. So Ronan, I think you can begin, and then after your presentation, our colleagues panelists will manage the session and the question. And I will look for the question that you will have in the chat and ask to you. Voilà. Ronan, you can
Thank you, Pierre-Louis. Thank you, all of you, for inviting me to present this work. So I'm Ronan Simoneau. I am a researcher in École Supérieure d'Agriculture Angers. I'm sensory scientist since 22 years, and working on wine, but also on fruit and veg, on ornamental plants. So my work is mainly focused on the sensory methodology, and I adapted that to different products. And of course, since a part of our lab work on wine characterization, on wine quality, on polyphenol characteristic, and we make some link with all this stuff and the practices impact on the sensory, etc. I am involved in a different project with sensory and link with the wine quality. Of course, it's at the same time it's quite exciting to be here, but quite frustrating to be not together and to drink wine and to smell wine at the same time. To discuss about the complexity, of course, it would be more exciting to have wines to discuss about than just a presentation. But the presentation I will share in a few minutes is a work we did that is not directly the thematic was not directly focused on the complexity, but I guess that it would be very interesting to use this methodology to have a better understanding about what is complexity. So I will now share my presentation using this one and this one and this one, and I guess you have it. Yep, it's okay. Do you have it?
Yes, it's okay.
Yes, thank you. So this work was about the development of a new methodology of the sensory characterization of wines that we call Ashrata for hierarchical rate all that apply, and which has the ambition to allow a richer and more complete aromatic characterization of the wines. And it's a part of the Lea Koenig PhD thesis that was carried out in collaboration with Oniris in Nantes. It's some specialist of sensometry, and also École Supérieure d'Agriculture, our team. And the project was co-funded by the Pays de la Loire region, and also an half was founded by our own institution, because we thought it was a very interesting topic and quite helpful in our project. So it's why ESA decided to pay for this thesis. Alors, here. So why do we need a new methodology to characterize wine, and where do we go from? I do not know who are exactly the participants. For the panelists, it's clear, but for others, so I begin by something quite large. You are normally well placed to know that tasting is decisive as a tool to define the quality of wine, that the quality is major in this very competitive context of wine, and the sensory characterization is therefore an essential step to ensure the quality of the products. And it's why the wines need to be tasted with different objectives. And of course, at the beginning, we need testers. We can work with producers, with enologists, with technicians, also with trend panelists, and sometimes with consumers. And at the beginning, it was just tasting, but then around the 80s, there is this interest for the sensory analysis, and with the development of this formalization of tasting and the arrival of sensory analysis as a reliable methodology. And with this standardization of the methodology, it allows an objective description of the wine. And of course, there is a lot of examples in the literature of the use of sensory analysis to characterize the attributes in relation to the terroir, to study the impact of agronomic and ecological practices on the quality of wines, or to provide information to communicate about the wines and its sensory characteristics. But then we all know again that wine is a difficult product. I mean that from a sensory point of view, it's something quite difficult because it's very aromatic, and whose aromatic is both a richness, but also a complexity for the evaluation to be carried out. And of course, we know that there is a very large number of volatile compounds that participate in this aromatic component of wine. And in face of this aromatic composition, there is a question of the verbalization of this aromatic diversity through this vocabulary that is both rich, but is also very diverse. And in fact, that complicates the assessment of the wine. And face to this aromatic complexity, we also know that there is a huge interpersonal variability from one taster to another. So we can have different perception. There is the individual sensitivity, yes, and there is sometimes the vagueness in the use of those vocabulary. You put the word in the correct with the correct accent. Excuse me. And then also we know that the expertise can have an impact on the characterization, and it's why it's so difficult, because there is all this diversity, there is all this difference between the testers, and when we have characterized the product, it's sometimes difficult to have access to this complexity. And notably, because to deal with this aromatic, I don't know if to deal with, but I mean, we often present attributes and aroma terms are often presented following a hierarchical arrangement, and we group them to structure and manage a large number of attributes. Of course, wine are very complex, so we can use a very long list of attributes to characterize them, but in a practical way, we often regroup product terms together to have something quite simplest to perform. And categories can be arranged, can be presented, and aromatic terms can be represented in table. We have this type of example with these two examples where terms are structured in such way that attributes are nested. Terms are arranged into different groups, and we have something so quite general, and then we have also the detail behind these general terms. Sometimes we have fruity, and we ask the testers to evaluate the fruity, even if it could perceive citrus, lemon or orange. But here, the final goal is just to reduce the number of attributes and to homogenize them in the sensory description. And the hierarchical links between attributes are commonly accepted in sensory analysis. There is a lot of literature about that that the order can be regrouped by family and category. But by the way, we lost some interesting information in the characterization, and it's why with this work we try to propose something who allow them to access this specificity. Of course, again, I hope it's not hope, but I guess that you all know the aroma wheel, and notably the one proposed by Nobel. But you know that at the beginning, Nobel used that to harmonize and the various the terminologies proposed to describe the aromatic characteristics of wine. And the aim was mainly to facilitating the communication between different stakeholders, winemakers, researchers, and consumers. But in fact, in practice, some authors also use that as a base for panelist training. To the best of our knowledge, this entire hierarchy with the general, the specific attributes, it's not used so far in the data acquisition or the data analysis. We use that for the training. We propose the consumers and testers to evaluate generally the category, but never a very long list, and they do not access all the list, and we never work with all this list. And another point that is very little described in the literature is how these hierarchies are constructed, how they are grouped together, the words. Who does this? How they do this, how many levels, how many attributes are grouped together, and why, and by what rules are used to group these attributes together. And there is also a question of stability, depending on the testers, depending on the group, on the expertise of the testers. Is this hierarchy could change depending on that. And it's why the work we done, oops, I forgot to click. The aim of our project was to develop a sensory approach integrating this hierarchical structure of the olfactory lexicon with two main parts. One is to define the structure, how to define the structure of an olfactory lexicon, how to objectivize this structuration, and with two papers. And today I will just mention which methodology should be put in place to take into account this hierarchical structure of the lexicon in the aromatic description of wines, and it will be the focus of my presentation today. So when I go deeper in this subject, we know that we have many sensory characterization methodology available, and most of them has been used on wines. But in all these different methodologies, we have decided to work with the RATA methodology. I do not know if you are familiar with Kata and RATA. You all know descriptive analysis. You have the list of a quite short list of attributes, and all panelists check that. I will not comment the others, but for the Kata and RATA, you have a quite longer list. And the panelists can select as much Kata is for check all that apply, donc they can check as much attributes they think it's necessary to describe the product, here the wine. But in the RATA, you can rate, you select and you rate, you give a score, an intensity score. And we have decided to use this approach because when you have more than 50 attributes, of course, the traditional descriptive analysis is not possible to be used, and it's why we have decided to use a kata or rata. And then we have discussed about rata or kata, and in fact, we found it was more effective to assess the aromatic intensity rather just choosing attributes as in the kata experiment. But of course, it could be work to compare later. So here the idea is for the H-rata, you combine a hierarchical structuration of the lexicon with a rata approach, and you have the H-rata. To test and to make a proof of concept, we applied this approach to the aromatic characterization of some rosé wines. We did an experiment with 66 subjects with some producers, some enologists, some students from ESA, very well trained, and also some consumers. And we asked them to evaluate only the orthonasal description just because it was a proof of concept, and we found it was easier to just focus on that for the moment. And they evaluated 5 rosé wines and 1 duplicate. One of them was duplicate. Of course, we had to decide which hierarchy to use, and we could use the one from Nobel, the attributes from the Centre du Rosé, since the wines will have been evaluated also by a trained panel. It would be interesting to use their list, since their list is also category with some terms behind, but we have decided, since it was in the middle of the PhD, to use the hierarchy that Léa Koenig in her PhD has developed. So the hierarchy we used was the following. It's in French, sorry for that, with 3 levels of hierarchy, with 9 families, with spicy, vegetal, roasted, mineral, chemical, underground, dry food, and so on, with 20 categories. Sometimes you have 1, 2, you have 5 for the fruit. Sometimes there is no under category, and with terms behind. And so at the end, the aim was to evaluate 118 attributes per wine. So of course, making a descriptive analysis with that, it's not possible. And since it was for a rata evaluation, we decided to add an intensity scaling, and we decided to use low, medium, intense. That means that the tester had to select the attributes he wants to evaluate, and then each time he clicks on attributes, we ask him low, medium, or intense. From the software interface point of view, I would have liked to work with a wheel, directly with a wheel, but it was not implemented in the FIS software. So we use this interface. Here you have the family, and when you click on the family, I can do that now, but you have this, it's changed, of course, depending on which one you select. And there you have the list, and you can go on fruit rouge and on red fruit. You will have access to the different terms associated to fruit rouge. Of course, the tester's add on his left, right, has a paper with all the attributes organized as presented here. Then, as the H-rata subject may rate the set of products according to different attributes above different level of generality, we have designed a dedicated statistical processing strategy. Indeed, compared to the conventional rata data, and in conventional rata, the lists are not so long than this one. Our data set was composed with a larger number of attributes, and few numbers of them was likely to be selected. So in comparison to H-rata, there is a very huge number of non-evaluated data with a lot of zero in this data set. And so we had to adapt the statistical techniques usually performed. First, it was not in the data analysis, but in the step of coding and sort of imputation of data depending on the answer of the panelists. So we make an aggregation step. in fact, depending on the answer, if the subject writes a category, I mean, for example, citrus, but not the family, we imputed the category store to the family. If a taster rate terms, but not the category or the family, we imputed that the score to the citrus or to the fruit. So as here, 1, here is selected that, but here 1, 3, and then depending when a panelist select 2 attributes in terms behind a category, we use an aggregation rules based on the maximum. That means that here with coconut 1 and pineapple 3, but no notes on tropical fruits, we impute the maximum of this. And again here, since it was not evaluated, but with the 3 here, we have decided to impute 3 here. Of course, all this information could be discussed, and for the moment, we have tested the methodology, and the proof of concept is based on this strategy. Another point we had to address was to have a rule for the non-evaluated attributes, because some subjects do not use some attributes at all. And the aim was to decrease the frequency of 0, notably when an attribute is not used by a subject for every sample. So here, the strategy was when in this situation with 2 subjects, 3 wines, 1 attribute, if the attribute is used at least once by the subject, we impute 0 for the other wines, meaning that it smells that sometimes, but for the other ones, it do not smell, so that means it's 0. But if it's not used at all, we have decided to cancel this subject, to delete this subject. That means that depending on the attribute, the number of subjects integrated in the analysis could change. Then, when we work on sensory data, there is often the question of, do we use the variance analysis or not? And we all know that, notably in Rata data, failure to meet assumption of data normality does not prevent from the use of analysis variance. We use it, even if it's not normal to use it. But minus in 2016 show that it's possible to use the variance. However, here, when we look at the data, there is such high number of attributes not evaluated or with 0 that we have a very pronounced asymmetry in the distribution of the scores due to this high frequency of 0. And it's why when we was looking for which attributes are discriminant, we have decided to not use the variance analysis, but to use a logistic regression based on the frequency. Then it was interesting to also to have a multidimensional representation of the data, again, as we can perform when we do sensory evaluation with a descriptive quantitative analysis. And here we have decided to use to work with an aggregated data. Often we work with average data. Here we have decided to use the Dravniak score, which integrates both the frequency of selection of some attribute and the intensity value collected. So it integrates the fact that some attributes are not used as much as others, and also integrated the intensity of evaluation. But at the end, the philosophy is quite similar than when you perform a PCA with an average table. And we have decided to test to use a non-standardized principal component analysis on this table. I will comment later a little bit more about that. So here you have a summary of this process. You have the raw data, then you implement, you make imputation depending of the terms to the category and to the family. Then you delete some attributes when they are not evaluated by a subject, and then you have two strategy for the data analysis with the logistic regression and the PCA on the driving score. When I move to the data, it's interesting to look at the impact of the data imputation on the number of scores, all wine together, all panelists together. Here you have what we observed when we look just the data without imputation. And here you have the impact when we make the imputation. Of course, for the food, it's quite spectacular. That means that the panelists never use food when they evaluate the product. They use mainly terms or terms. I do not present terms here, but terms or the category. But when you implement the terms into the category and the category into the family, of course, the food is quite often quoted and used. And for each, you have the end. By the way, that means that if someone uses a term, you give the information about the category and the family. So your data set is more complete and it's more robust in the analysis. When we look at the logistic regression, in order to evaluate the attributes that are discriminant, in fact, you see that we have 118 attributes. At the end, 5 family levels were significant, 10 category, and 23 terms were significant. That means that half of the other categories made it possible to discriminate the product. That means that they were more selected for at least one wine compared to the other. Then it's interesting to look how it works. For example, here you have the milky. I'm not sure. There is butter, bread behind this term. It's interesting to see that the lactic category is quite discriminant, but in fact, behind there is only the butter that was discriminant, and yeast and bread were not. So you have the detail. It's not just lactic, and if you work with only the category, as we often do when we give a short list to the panelists, here you have access of the category, but also which attribute behind is significant. In the case of RC, it's quite different because here the category had a significant p-value for the RC, but none of the terms were significant behind, maybe because it was under the level of significance, and it's more because it's some tendency that makes that RC at the end is significant. And on the category, sometimes here rubber is significant. Oops, I forget it. Yes, and alcohol, but chemical that was linked to that was not significant. And we will see on the PCA why it's interesting to have both level, because at the chemical level it's not significant, but there is some differences for the two other attributes. When we perform the non-standardized PCA on the Dragnet score, here it was again a choice. Which attributes used for the PCA? We have decided to make the PCA on the category and put as supplementary variable the family and the terms, just because the aim was to compare that with the sensory panel done by the Centre du Rosé, also because often we resume the sensory characterization to the category. But of course, again, this point could be discussed for the following experiments. But here it's interesting to see that some wines are clearly discriminate with the wine A. You have here some separation with other wines. You have a good replication here with the two wines, and you have access to the different characteristics as we can have in a global characterization done by a trained panel. I have to drink a glass. Sorry. Then it's very interesting to put the terms attributes as supplementary variable. And here it's quite interesting because here we can see that in fact chemical was not significant because the two attributes linked to these attributes are linked to different products. Here rubber is quite linked to wine A, when alcohol is more significant for wine E. So when you you merge all this information at the level of the category, it's not significant. So if you ask the panel only to evaluate the chemicals, it will maybe not be significant, or both will be, but you see that it can explain why we have this difference in the evaluation. And we have also the fact that for the floral, here you have some global evaluation that linked for wine B, C, and D, but there is something quite specific on wine E about a violet note. Again, with this strategy, it's possible to access this quite specificity for this wine. Then, to compare, to validate this concept, we made a comparison with descriptive analysis done by the 13 trained panelists from the Centre du Rosé, well trained on rosé wine, of course, with their own list. And here you have both lists. You have the different category we work with during the Ashrata attributes. And in fact, we found in the list, the idea was to use the list that the panelists from the Centre du Rosé use often. So, but we found some common point between both. Of course, we could have also make something more linked, but it was decided to make two separate analyses and see if it's matched or not. When we look at the data and the result, we obtain a good RV coefficient. That means that the multidimensional representation is quite interesting. We found the results are quite comparable. Of course, we have more details as I presented to you before, and we have also some differences. I have to be honest that there is some differences. Of course, the differences could be due to the training, to the tester sensitivity, to the list. Of course, here there is some things that we should discuss more, and we need more experiments to better understand and validate the pertinence and the efficiency of the methodology. If I move to the following step of the development of this concept, we have decided to work with the Ashrata, but maybe you know that when we discuss about the time intensity, TDS, T-kata, there is always a discussion of if we need to have consumer to only select or select and give a note, and to weight the importance and what we win or lose by both approach. So of course, developing a hierarchical check all that applies could be quite interesting. We have also to work on the impact of the interface. One of the ideas of this approach is to decrease the cognitive charge of making a sensory evaluation with so much important number of attributes. So of course, the way we used with this table and with this different sheet, and you have to click, and it's more demanding, it's more difficult for the panelists than access probably to a wheel that it could use. So of course, it could be very interesting to use it to compare different strategies to present the hierarchy to the panelists. Finally, there is things interesting to work on about the tester behavior, depending on their expertise, depending on the way they behave, the number of attributes, the complexity of the wheel, and so on. They would have a lot of things interesting to test. Here, I just show you a first draft. It was a dream, and maybe the dream is a reality. During the PhD, it was not possible to implement that, but since then, I have developed with an informatic school this wheel, and now you have to know that some software, some sensorial software propose the wheel, and you can implement as I show you here. But the idea was quite to be quite intuitive. That means that you just have to make the wheel turn. You can to select. You have some pop-ups. You can close. You can change, etc. And notably on FIS software, but also maybe on CompuSense, you can find that, and it would be quite interesting for the development of the Ashrata. You can use that and implement your own Ashrata if you need. Then there's still work to do on the data processing and analysis. We work on the data, the Ashrata. We have our own script based on R. So for the aggregation when we have the data set, you have to make a routine to make the imputation, to use the different routes we have defined. So we have some script to do that, and also for the treatment, the DraftNext scores, and so on, we have implemented that to have something quite easy to use, but based on our script. But again, we have still work to do on the data processing, the data, the rules for the aggregations, imputation, and so on, and also to compare different multidimensional approach. Here we have just selected the non-normalized PCA, but I did some extra works on Apple, and I begin to have some comparison, and maybe the normalized based on only the significant attributes would be more easier to read, and so we can discuss about that also. And finally, because there is also the user point for the practitioner that would implement that, I would like to develop something with a Shiny system in our studio, because it would be very helpful for the users to just click on free rouge red fruit and see which attributes are linked to that, and to have something quite easy to manipulate than using the traditional R script. So I am at the end of the presentation, and of course, it's very open about what we can do. You see, just a proof of concept. I guess that it could be very interesting to catch information about the complexity when you smell, and you have to give all this information. We can have, when enologists describe wines, they can use a lot of words to describe the wine. And by the way, we access more information than just asking to score a short list of attributes, as we often do for descriptive analysis. Then it would also be very exciting to adapt this methodology to different products, as you can see here, and I will be very happy to test that on all that. And that's all. I hope you enjoy the presentation, and I am available for any question you have. Or not.
Okay, thank you very much, Ronan. It was very interesting, the different approach. And maybe just before the panelist comment and interaction, we have one question that was sent a few time ago. It's from Davide Slagennofi, and he say that it's very interesting. He asks you how you deal with significant differences related to, for example, cinnamon scents. Yep. Since only 7 judges on total 66 perceive it.
Yeah, it's true that there is a lot of question about that. I sometimes discuss with people working on olfactometry evaluation, and you know that when the question of the significativity, pardon, of the data, when you have more than 2, 3, 4, 5, and when there are several people who said something on one wine, maybe that means that it's here. So of course, and the DraftNext scores, in fact, I do not enter deeper in this information, but the DraftNext scores integrate the frequency and the intensity. So the white of the cinnamon is lower than others on the PCA due to the fact that it's take into account the fact that there is only 7. So of course, when I present and notably the only example I have, but it was not possible to present that today about fruits. Of course I do not say the same thing when it's based on 30, 40 people than 7. So you have to adapt your own, and it's why on the table we present the significativity of the test, but also the number of judges, to be able to make this nuance in the results. So I definitely agree with this comment.
Okay, thank you, Ronan. And I think that Davide can say okay, probably. So if it's not the case, he can mention it. But I think it's okay for the answer. And so I will let maybe now the floor to the colleagues and the panelists for interaction with you and their questions.
Thank you, Ronan. That was an excellent presentation. It's a fascinating adaptation of the RATA method. I guess something that I would like to ask you about is how you think that you could use this method with different sets of judges. So, you know, traditionally, Kata or RATA have been used with consumers to help get a sensory profile of different products. What about, because we have such a very robust selection of attributes that can be used now to describe these products, in this case, wine, do you think that you could perhaps use that this method could also be used effectively with trained judges, with, say, winemakers who have a good understanding of, like you mentioned, of exactly what these terms mean and have seen them in wine? Do you think that perhaps using trained judges and then maybe decreasing the number of judges that you have to use, perhaps there's some places to move within this work?
Definitively, it's some points that I did not develop about. In the 66 panelists, we had some enologists, some students, and some consumers also. And because we add to the task, we had also a questionnaire to understand it was easy to use and the feeling during the task, and for all of them, it was quite it was interesting because they said it was easy to use. It was at least feasible.
Yes.
So I guess that from the technical point of view to make the task, it's okay. Then of course, doing that with consumers, you have to be sure, at least as for a kata, if consumers do not know some words, they will never use them. But despite that, they can use the hierarchy. For the professional, for me, there is no problem. But for the trained panelists, here is the point, because should we train the panelists on the 118 attributes before using that? Yeah, it's not easy to know because it's I do not work on that. Often when we train our panelists, sometimes we let some degree of freedom. So I guess that it could be interesting. So when we work with, I try to think about the question now, but when we work with the noble will, we have a list of reference. So why not? We could train the panel on that, and even if we train on these terms, sometimes you do not smell the orange. It's just citrus, and it lets it lets the possibility to the panelists to say, I'm not sure what is exactly the test. So if I give only a list of terms, he will force to answer even if it do not know. Here you can say, maybe it's citrus, And so I guess we could use that with them.
When I think of compare, like in the portion that you compared to the descriptive analysis assessments, just thinking that, you know, with all the training that goes into descriptive analysis panelists, all the time it takes to run all the sessions, et cetera, if you could take this session, you know, this, you know, just the hierarchical RATA and get something very close to the kind of, you know, something very similar from a, you know, comparing with your RV coefficients, which were pretty close, you know, that's your, you know, there's a lot of value in that for, you know, for producers to, or researchers to be able to use to get quick and valuable data.
Pascal or Antonio?
Yes, maybe maybe a question, but I think it's really close from this one from Davide. When you, we have the problem that all panelists don't scale all the attributes, and how do you manage the fact that sometimes one panelist it's more generous in terms of weight than the other? That means for the same perception, maybe one will be a weight of 2 and another one is systematically of 7. And how do you use the compensation because with the analysis of variance, you can estimate it the way they use the scale, but in this case, how do you do you?
No, I agree. I agree with this comment. For the moment, the strategy we use do not integrate this particular situation because the Dravniak scores, there is a ponderation with the frequency of use and the intensity, but to my, I believe that it's not integrate this judge effect as you can have with the variance analysis. So sure. Maybe it's yes a limitation, but again we have not enough feedback to evaluate. I would need more data to answer that more precisely.
Yeah, because otherwise it's really interesting and.
But in fact, since we use it's not exactly, but since we use a 3-point scale and not a 10-point scale, maybe the impact of the scale is a little bit lower than when we use a 10-point scale.
Okay.
But it's something we should verify. I'm not sure.
Okay, thanks.
Well, Ronald, from my side, the difficult thing is to choose the 2 or 1 question out of about 57 I have here to make to you. So this is really a hard exercise. So let me try to go this way. The main subject of this session today is about complexity in terms of developing objective measures, and of course. This method seems a very good approach to do that. But I would like to focus on the concept of complexity and how that translates in terms of value for consumers in the way of how they can understand it themselves. I mean, if complexity is something valued by consumer, how can we get them to acknowledge the existence of complexity in a specific wine so that they will value that wine from the complexity it's got? And one of the things, I must say that in my company, we use the aroma wheel in interactions with consumer for quite a long time. We had on our website software similar to the one you've shown, where consumers could pick on the different attributes and the different groups, and then compare their sensations with a pre-recorded pattern of attributes done by the winemaker himself for each of the wines that we had. We are not having that anymore, but I would like to recover that and develop that further for more intense interactions with consumers. But one of the things I would like to know your opinion is this. We in the wine sector and in the enology science, we group attributes according to memories. Whereas, for instance, in the perfume industry, scents are grouped according to their own characteristics and not really memories. I mean, for the perfume industry, the groupings will be according to the characteristic of the scent, if it is fresh, if it is acrid, if it is sweet, and so on and so on. So in interacting with consumers and applying this approach of HRATA, do you think that we are going the right way by tapping onto memories of people in order to group them, or would it have a better approach in liaising the consumer perception with the message that the producer wants to pass if we would group them in terms of characteristics of the scents? What is your opinion on that?
The opinion is that it was planned in the PhD, that in fact at the beginning of the PhD we had three parts. One was about the first one was about the structuration of the hierarchy, and for that we have two parts. One was to work with odorant and one with words. So one was the memory of the representation of the words, and the other one would have been about the smell and try to see how it works and that. So, but for practical reason, and it was not possible to do all this stuff during the PhD. So we are focused on the first point. So I find that very exciting to discuss. Another point is that it would be also interesting to do I do not answer to the characteristic as a, so I have no answer about the odor and the objective characteristic or the wrong characteristic compared to the memory and the verbalization of that. It's quite complex to see what is the best. But one thing is that often we use the noble wheel as a reference, but it's done by enologists and by wine specialists. And in fact, we do the same work with consumers. So we do the word association to make the structuration, and we do that with professional, wine professional, and also with consumers. And here is the point that there is, I do not remember, but on the list of 100, there is at least that was selected from the literature on 100 attributes. There is almost 20 or 25 that was not understood by the consumers. So if you use these wheels that use terms that are not comprehensible, understandable by the consumers, it will not work. They will oh, it's very, or just for marketing reason.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, it's just mineral, Pascal. Oh, it's written mineral, it's very exciting. I do not know, I definitely do not know what it means, but it's very exciting because it's written mineral. Okay, but from a sensory representation, it's not very helpful. So in the discussion we had with Lea Koenig, there is something about the fact that maybe we should adapt the wheels depending on the target, something more for the professionals, something more adapted for the consumers, in order to have information and certain information from this methodology.
Thank you. A very quick last question before passing on to Pierre-Louis. Do you think that the perception of complexity has got to do with the tasting proficiency of the taster? I'm meaning the better, the more experienced the taster, the better perception of complexity he can have, or can we have a universal measure of complexity?
There is maybe person more pertinent to answer this question in the panel and in the audience, but I believe that consumers are maybe more when they have no they are more sensitive on how say that sciences, some very clear notes, they can identify that. But when you have the huge experience you have as a wine professional you are more sensitive of the diversity of notes, and maybe you are more sensitive to this complexity. But
Right.
I never work specifically on complexity, so I will not say more than that.
Thank you very much, Rona.
But if I can, the good point with this method, it's you can use exactly the same session for each set of wine, and you don't have to adapt the list of attributes each time. So it's really useful for scientists and also for professionals, I think. Good point.
Very interesting in terms of approaches. So we have also one other question from our colleague Arina Antonse from Bucharest. She is asking you, first of all, if you will share the PowerPoint presentation. And so I think that as there is a registration, Agathe will put on the website, so probably everybody can see it. And then she's asking, do you plan to make a commercial version of the software to be applicable by the professional?
No. In fact, at the beginning it was yes. It's why I show you my first demo. It was because I plan to ask for the development of this software specifically for that, because I thought that FIS, the French software, will not implement that in the software. But when there is a discussion, I said that I was in discussion with others, and they said, we can do that. And they implement that in the new version of FIS. And to be honest, at the beginning, I work on this development of software just for us and for the wine professional, but at least for us to be able to continue to work on this topic. Since FIS said that on the new version, this wheel is available, unfortunately, I will not continue to work on that, because you need a lot of money to do software development. So you have, and I'm sure that in CompuSense, there is also a wheel, but I do not know if it's clickable, if how it works, and if we can manage that as a Ashrata. But I have tested the one from FIS, and it will be okay in some months.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe one point, this is my question, my approach. I don't know if it's of interest, but it looks to me that there is finally 2 points there. One is intensity approach, and the other one is a diversity approach. And how to manage that all together, finally, because in some cases, we want to be precise. In some other, just give an idea. So how we can combine or have something that interact, that's the difficulty there for me. Is there one approach that can solve that?
In fact, today, if I have to work on the first subject I would like to continue to work with is the Ashkata, because I don't know if you're familiar, Pierre-Louis, with kata and rata, but the question is only selection or selection and rate, and it was the same. We know that kata is more and more used than the rata, and it's the same for time intensity, T-kata, they prefer. We know that from a cognitive perspective, it's so much easier to select. And when you have to put the intensity, it asks a lot of effort from the panelists. So you lose at the end, they are tired and they are more sensitive, more efficient, and so on. So to work on complexity, if I had to discuss about that, I thought that I will maybe more focus on the selection of attributes, the diversity of selection, in order to make maybe more wine, maybe to work differently than to ask each time the intensity.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Antonio want to react.
No, but it's okay. It's okay.
Very quickly, because it just came something to my mind, which would be using the TDS approach together in terms of having the taster assess on the first whiff what he retains of the different notes he feels and the intensity of different notes, and then going for a second and a third whiff to get again back that information. In that way, he would not have to be making a strong effort in describing as much as he can and whiffing several times to do that, but rather to focus on what are the main notes, the main characters coming through. Maybe this coupling together of TDS with HRATA could work for what Pierre-Louis was saying.
But yes, it's a very important issue, because in function of the type of the panel, we need to have something adaptable. So, and that's one of the key of the probably of the subject. So there is probably what to do on that.
And there is also a question about the number of consumer tasters needed to be sensitive enough, because with professional compared to consumers, it's always the same discussion we have in sensory science with this question of amount of people. But of course, here with so many attributes on the wheels, I guess that we need more consumers, more tasters to be discriminant as with other methods. Pascal?
No, I think it's what you answer. And my question was, how many tasters do you need to be good? And if it's expert panel or not?
I will not answer.
If you want, I have a session tomorrow evening and we can test, but only with 10 or 12 panelists. So
again,
I don't know if it's enough.
That, there is a lot of work when we compare, but we would have to make the test with maybe 300 consumers, and then we can use the Monte Carlo and so échantillonnage. Bootstrap, thank you, to evaluate if there is some threshold, because often we just work with 20, maybe 30, but of course then you have this plateau, je sais pas comment this slope. Mais so yes, of course it would be very interesting to test with consumers and trained panelists or experts to see if there is some ideal number of subjects using this methodology.
Thank you. So I don't know if there is some other question from the panelists or from the audience. From the audience, I don't see. I don't know, for the panelists, do you have any other question?
Many, but do we have time?
we have passed already 1 hour, so we are 10 minutes after. I think that we should stop now, but it's really a very important subject. And I think that we should pay more attention to this type of subject with some approaches, and maybe develop a network altogether concerning sensory, hierarchical methodology or characterization, to try to work with the same finally rules, and it can help also to do interpretation and work all together. So
I totally agree there, Pierre-Louis, and I think there is a huge field of development of these techniques in what comes to characterizing products by consumers. Traditionally, in our analogical schools and analogical science, we have focused very much on giving these tools for enologists and winemakers. And we now have a dissection between the perception of the professional and the perception of the person who, in the end of the day, is going to buy the wine. And we need to couple this together. And that is something that, even if in countries like the United States and Australia, they have progressed a lot in that, I still feel there is still a lot of work that can be developed there for that. So I think it would be quite interesting if in OENOVITI we could provide the ground to develop this this approach.
We should think to a project on that, but well, this will be developed in the frame of the OENOVITI network, and so there will be next event also. So we will have 2 other spring meetings. Should be the first semester of 2022, and we will have also the General Assembly of OENOVITI and also symposium in May. It will be in fact 2 symposiums in Japan. One that will be in Yamanashi and the other one in Kyoto. And so we will have some time to work probably on project and development. So I want to thank all of you, all the panelists, of course the speaker that was doing a great effort, and we can see that is now in recuperation phases. Yes, with a glass of wine, and so I wish to all of you a good afternoon, a good evening for the ones that are very late, a good sleep, especially for Wes. And so we hope to see all the partners, all the colleagues that connect for the symposium quickly for the next event. And we will communicate as soon as possible the new topics quickly. And thanks again to all of you.
Merci.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
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 Yes.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.